Good morning. Hello and welcome back. So today I'm going to talk about the feminine as it's emerging at this time. Those of us that are spiritual and psychological and have been following Jung or are interested in his psychology have known for a long time that this was happening, that this was a part of the evolution of consciousness. And what's really surprised me about what's happening now is the amount of pushback there is to that emergence. And although I believe it's always in service to the greater good and to the ultimate emergence, it's just something that I didn't expect and found to be somewhat surprising. So it's rising, it's returning, it's emerging from the unconscious after centuries, really, of being repressed, rejected, and devalued. So this level of pushback from the patriarchy to the feminine is an attempt to keep things the way that they are. It's an attempt to not allow this transformation to keep going forward, so to speak. But this transformation is bigger than anybody and can't be controlled by other people in this world. It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of when. So this is a challenging time for us, right? When they're trying to roll back the rights of women, rights that have been enjoyed for generations. So it was just my mother's generation that she had endometriosis and wanted to get a hysterectomy, and she couldn't get one without my father's approval. And my grandmother was depressed, and they went to the doctor, and the doctor took my grandfather aside, and fortunately he said, the only thing that's wrong with your wife is she needs to get a job. And fortunately for my grandmother, my grandfather agreed, and so that was the solution. She just needed to go back to work. But the doctor told her husband. He didn't tell her and say, hey, you just need to do this. And he had to give his approval on it. So it's not that long ago. This is not that many years ago that these things were happening. And so, we kind of believed that our rights and our freedoms were, just this progress, upward, onward, kind of going forward. But what we're seeing now is obviously this pushback to that. So if you've been listening to me for any length of time, you've been hearing me talk about the feminine and how in the myths and fairy tales she was sacrificed. The daughter, the heroine, was sacrificed by the father. So in the myth of Agamemnon, he sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to Artemis because he wanted favorable winds to go to war. The warriors were getting restless because the winds weren't coming up, and they said, Artemis is mad at you because you went hunting and you killed one of her stags, and so you need to sacrifice your daughter. So they lied to his daughter Iphigenia and told her that she was going to be married to Achilles, who was a great warrior. And so that was what they told her in order to get her to come to where her father and everybody was. And of course it was a lie, and they put her on the altar to sacrifice her, and at the last minute Artemis snatched her away. So she was rescued, and she became a priestess in Artemis's temple. And then we have Psyche's father, which you've heard me talk about, and he went to the oracle and said, my daughter doesn't have any suitors. What can we do? And the oracle said to dress her in funeral attire and take her to the top of a mountain and sacrifice her to the monster, to the beast. And that's what they did. Fortunately, that isn't what happened. If you've heard me talk about this story, you know that. But so again and again, there's this theme of sacrifice of the daughter. And so in fairy tales, the handless maiden, father, sacrificed her to the devil for money. Rapunzel's father sacrificed her to who she was taken by the old woman behind the walls because his wife was ravenous and needed lettuce and more lettuce. Cinderella's father sided with the stepmother and turned against Cinderella, basically abandoned her. Hansel and Gretel's father turned against them and sided with their stepmother. In Beauty and the Beast, Beauty's father sacrificed her to the beast too, for he ultimately got money for it. So all of these sacrifices of the feminine are, on a superficial level, it would look like they sacrificed their daughters. On a deeper level, what it shows us is how the feminine has been sacrificed in the culture. And the feminine in the stories represents the soul. So in the interest of progress, in the interest of advancement, that was set aside. And there was this focus, like a hyper focus, basically, on things that are associated with the patriarchy. So the way of thinking would be literal, logical, rational. It would be head over heart, head over feelings and emotions. It would be, linear progress, life over death. Like all these things that are aligned with the masculine would be what the preferences were for. And so what happened with that was those things that were associated with the feminine then went into the unconscious, because this has been going on for thousands of years. I mean, I don't know how old the Agamemnon Iphigenia story is, but that's not Christian. It's before Christianity. And you can see also in our Bible very similar themes in Christianity. So the feminine and the soul was basically set aside in the interest of advancement. Now, again, if you look at dreams, if you look at fairy tales, the things that we judge, if we take judgment out of situations, so you would say, okay, this sacrifice then is a negative thing. And superficially and on the surface, it would appear that way. But because at a deeper level, the feminine is being initiated, then what's happening on a superficial level is just with judgment is in what's like appears to be rejected is not. It has a deeper purpose, and that is for the feminine and the soul to come to consciousness. So you could look at the father as being representative in the story, as being representative of the ego, let's say. And the point of the ego basically takes us up into, like this happens for a lot of people, like where a midlife crisis happens. Like the ego is carrying us along up until that point. And then at that point, there becomes this awareness that what we've been told is the satisfying, fulfilling way to live life is not actually working. And that is not actually it. And so this feeling of something missing, something off, is around the soul. That is what's missing. That is what's off. So for many of us, especially women, there was this, that have a little bit more access typically to emotion, there was this awareness, this feeling, this kind of deep sense like that, and you've heard me talk about this before, that something is off, something doesn't feel right. And it's that part of us that was in the unconscious that didn't have a place to be in the world, or there wasn't awareness of it. Because what happens is we're conditioned in childhood to believe that we're the ego. The way I describe this sometimes is, it's like when you're born, there's a blank book. And so what happens is your parents, let's say, start and say, your name is, you live here, I'm your mommy, this is your daddy, this is your sister, this is your brother. And then it kind of builds, the story builds. This is your religion, this is where you live, this is how educated you are, this is what we believe, this is what we think, this is your role in our family, This is your role in the society. This is what happens when you go to school. And so all of these things are basically what your parents were taught, they teach you. And they put it into this book. And so if you meet somebody and they said, who are you? And you just said, well, I'm the, this is the book. You can hand them the book and say, this is me. But it's just a book and it's just a story. And if you put that aside, you're still you. And that's still you. And that's another part of you. That essence that is you is the soul. It requires different things. The ego wants to be built up. It wants to succeed. It wants acknowledgement. It wants approval. It wants validation. It wants love. But the soul has all those qualities inherently. The soul is inherently worthy. It is inherently enough. It is inherently has value. And it is inherently content. So this constant striving that the ego does to fill a bucket with something that can't fill it. It's like the proverbial bucket with the holes in it, or the bucket you're trying to fill with air, and you never can do it. There's never enough to get inside, right? So this idea that the soul isn't satisfied persists, and that is what we're trying to fill, but we're trying to fill it with the wrong things. So the soul appreciates things that are different than what the ego appreciates. So if you think back like to childhood, right? Just laying in the grass, watching the clouds float by. And there's this kind of satisfaction with life. I remember for me when I spent time with my grandparents, it was always this sense of peace to just even sit in the yard in the evenings and just talk. I mean, I can't imagine I found the conversation very interesting, but to go to the garden, to pick the vegetables from the garden and harvest them. I mean, there were just such simple things, and those are the things that satisfies the soul. A garden, baking bread, woodworking, things that are slow, that are creative sometimes, those things put us in touch with our soul, and they nurture that part of us. So the feminine in these stories in our life has been basically repressed and rejected, like I said. So what the stories are doing is telling us, this is where you are, this is what's happening, and this is how to get out of it. So the story takes us step by step and shows us how to shift out of the ego position and into the position of the soul, or to become more aware of it. Doesn't happen necessarily for most of us overnight, because it's been a conditioning that's happened for a very long time. But when we take the time to inquire within, to look within, we find that the emptiness that we're trying to fill comes from inside, not outside, which is why the outside doesn't fill it. Now, sometimes there can be a temporary moment where something outside appears to fill it. But what usually happens is once that outside thing gets old, or that outside thing goes away, then suddenly there feels like there's this hole or this emptiness again where that loss is now. So that doesn't end up being really much of a solution in the end anyway, which is why this initiation is happening. So on the one hand, we can look at what's happening in the world as a regression, which can happen, but what happens sometimes is that what appears as a regression can be in service to something bigger, like that something wasn't seen before. So there has to be this regression in order to spring forward. An example of this is in Beauty and the Beast. And so when Beauty is living with the Beast, her father thinks the Beast killed her. So father thinks she's kaput. So he's depressed about that. And because, basically it was his fault. So Well, although he blamed it on her, but still, ultimately, it was his fault because he's the one that agreed to it. But anyway, I mean, again, that's on one level, but on another level, she was being initiated, so it had to happen that way. But she wants to go back and see her father and let him know that she's okay. I mean, beyond okay, she's thriving. So the beast agrees to let her go back. And when she does that, she ends up getting distracted by her sisters. They have an ulterior motive. They want to basically disrupt her happiness, and so they're pretending they love her, and they don't want her to leave so that she stays. And then she realizes, this is not the life I want. She comes to make that decision, and she ends up going back to the beast, but because she chooses it. She makes that decision. She makes that choice. She actually doesn't even say goodbye to anybody. She just leaves. So what can be seen as a regression, because the father's house represents the original consciousness, that original state of consciousness. So that's how we can see what's happening now. What's happening now is that there's this attempt to return to the original state of consciousness, or let's say an earlier state of consciousness in this situation, in the cultural situation. But what is really happening is that a choice has to be made at some level for the collective, and for the way for us to participate in that and to contribute to that choice is that we need to make those decisions for ourselves. We need to make those choices for ourselves on an inner level, and ultimately that would lead to a change in our lives, and that transformation in ourselves and in our lives will go into the collective and help transform the collective in order to change what we're experiencing now. So the feminine in the story isn't a victim. She's being initiated to come into her power. And the more that we can remember that as we go through difficult times, the more we are able to open to see, okay, if I'm being initiated, what is it that I'm being shown? What is the quality in me that's latent? And I had a dream about this years ago. And in the dream, I was trying to drive this big, huge dump truck. And initially, there was a guy driving it, but there was this somebody who had a problem on the side of the road. He got out of the truck to go help. I didn't. I stayed in the truck and watched what was happening. And I decided I wasn't going to go jump in and to some degree rescue this person that was having trouble on the side of the road. And when I made that decision, I slid across the seat of the truck into the driver's seat. So when the guy came back, he got in at the passenger seat, and I got into the driver's seat. And when I tried to drive the truck, I couldn't, because I didn't have the muscles to do it. So I knew when I woke up, I had to build up these muscles that hadn't been used, that you could say were atrophied, that were latent, that were somehow I hadn't built up over time, and they were weak. So every once in a while, he had to reach over and help me keep the vehicle on the road. But it was so weird to have that physical experience of literally not being, like, feeling so weak that you couldn't. You might have had this experience before, like when you did something for a really long time, like if you're not used to like weed whacking and you use a weed whacker for a really long time, after a while, because of that, the overuse of a muscle you're not used to using, then it's almost like your muscle feels, your arm feels really weak, like you almost couldn't pick up a glass or something. And it's that feeling of not having used, and of course this is symbolic because it was a dream. So then I knew when I woke up, I was like, there are muscles that I have that I haven't used and that I need to develop in order to keep this big, huge dump truck on the road and going in the right direction. And so that's what we're being asked to do, is through this initiation, through these initiations of the feminine. And this goes for you whether you're a male, female, whatever your gender identity is. It doesn't matter, because those qualities are what is, that are latent, that are identified and associated with the soul, are the ones that are coming into consciousness. And so there's a deeper strata of truth that we are going to be accessing. And of course, the dreams are one way, but the fairy tales are another way, because they're giving us a map, a roadmap on how to navigate through our lives to shift out of ego and into soul, and ultimately through life itself, and ultimately to participate in this shift of consciousness in the culture. So the stories that the fairy tales are archetypal, and because they're archetypal, which means they come from a very deep place in the unconscious, a deep place which we all share. So at some level, you probably already know from physics that we're all connected. And so at that deeper level, these stories and these archetypal things emerge. And so, as you've also heard me talk about over time, that Psyche and Amor, or Eros and Psyche, is a story that was a kind of the seed for a lot of fairy tales that we still have in our culture. And in that story, Venus was the initiator, and subsequently in the fairy tales, the goddess is now gone. And which funny enough, that story actually said, that story was like that. It was almost like a moment in time, a snapshot of the goddess who was falling into, she was sliding back into the unconscious, and she was upset about it. That's essentially what happens in the story. And Psyche, which is the Greek word for soul, was the one who had to be transformed. That soul and that's why the goddess had to go into the unconscious, because Psyche the soul had to be transformed. So what I think is possible is that this long trajectory of patriarchy and the masculine must have been necessary, I'm thinking technologically, to get us to a particular point. And so now that we're at that point, because so many people are talking about this, right? So now that we're at that point, we need to go back in and see, how do we shift this in ourselves and really step into a deeper truth in ourselves in order to help shift the collective and to re-empower women, to empower women. So I have finished the free course that I've been talking about. It's a free mini series, I should say, and this is going to take you through the initial steps in how to begin to see and transform these stories in ourselves, because that's what they are, right? That's what that book is. It's a story. So what we're doing is we're transforming that and shifting our identity from one place to another. So I've taken this mini series and created a way to go in and begin to look at this for ourselves. So it's basically the beginning of the Beauty and the Beast story that we'll be looking at. So this is about transforming our consciousness, our lives, and ultimately our culture, and contributing to it in a way that is beneficial to all. So if you're interested in shifting the consciousness of the collective, as I am, and doing everything that you can to participate in that, then ultimately what wants to happen is that from that place of soul, you understand that you're here for a reason. You understand that you matter, that you have value, and that you have things to share with the world that are going to be helpful in terms of transforming consciousness. You're going to be able to contribute. If leadership is in your wheelhouse, then that's going to be a part of it. So if you're interested in joining me for this, again, it's free, then you can DM me, or you can just put interested under this video, and I will get the links to you to join. It will be 3 live calls with me, and we'll be starting next week. So that would be the week of, I don't know, I don't have the, anyway, today's the 13th, and let's see, 14th. So the week of the 15th. So I figured that out. Anyway, so thank you for joining me. We're all in this together, and yeah, there has to be a way out. There has to be a way through. And the more that we can join together and find a way and support each other and encourage each other and believe in each other, the more that we can contribute to this shift into greater heart. So thank you for joining me. It was good to see you this week, and have a great week ahead. Thanks. Remember to DM me if you're interested, or drop a note underneath. Take care.